Welcome back once again to Brian Keene's Secret Histories. I am Brian Keene. In this series, we go through my books in the order that they were written and published. And I tell you the behind the scenes, their origin stories, where I got the idea, what went into the process, what, if any, impact the book had on my career or on the horror genre as a whole. Today we are, of course, talking about urban Gothic. And to talk about urban Gothic, let's recap where we are right now. Okay, I am burned out. I have writer's block, which is a problem because I have a lot of things that are due, a lot of things that I have to write. At this time in history, I have just finished Castaways, and I need to finish The Cage, Scratch, and The Girl on the Glider, both of which we're going to talk about very soon, as well as Clickers 3, which I'm co-writing with Jesus Gonzalez. I'm putting together the short story collection Unhappy Endings, which we've already talked about, and I'm promoting Darkness on the Edge of Town, and I have to start a novel called A Gathering of Crows. That's a lot. And keep in mind, in the midst of doing all this, my marriage is starting to crumble. The world's economy is starting to crumble with the Great Recession. Horror itself, as a genre for fiction, is starting to crumble. Everything is beginning to collapse. But the books still have to get written, don't they? So we talked about, to break my writer's block, I decided I would purposely try to write some odes to writers that I admired, beginning with Richard Lehman and Castaways. This was going to be my Edward Lee tribute book. And it is indeed my Edward Lee tribute. But none of you know the real behind the scenes of this book because I've never talked about it until now. And to talk about that, we need to talk about author James A. Moore. Now, Jim was always what they call a writer's writer. He was one of those writers that all the other writers just loved his stuff. He never found the super mass audience. I mean, he certainly had his fans, but Jim was he was a craftsman. He was a tradesman. He was a solid writer. You could always count on him for a good story. If you're putting together an anthology, you always went to Jim Moore. If you had a media tie-in like Aliens or Predator or World of Darkness or The Avengers, or Doctor Who, he wrote for so many media properties. Jim was always the guy that editors and publishers and other authors went to. Something the public does not know about Jim is he was also probably the most prolific ghostwriter that horror fiction has ever had. And what a ghostwriter is, for those of you who don't know, it doesn't mean that you're writing about ghosts. A ghostwriter is someone who writes books for other people. Now, that doesn't always mean the finished book, okay? A ghostwriter can do a first draft, and then the writer can go in and revise it and edit it and rewrite portions and put it in their own voice. A ghostwriter is sort of like AI, I guess, except it's a human being. And Jim ghost wrote for so many people in horror and in fantasy and in sci-fi and in westerns and in romance. Indeed, the you know, Jim was a super prolific author under his own name, and he made a lot of money as that. Like most mid-listers, he never got wealthy, but he made a decent living. Um, but ghostwriting was where he would really pull in the money, because he was fast. He could deliver fast. He always delivered solid, dependable work. And so we get to Urban Gothic, and the book was due to Leisure in 8 weeks' time, and I hadn't yet started it. So I decided to hire Jim to do a first draft for me. Now, this was my thought. My thought was, I'll outline the book. I'll tell Jim what I'm going for. Jim's also a big Edward Lee fan. I'll have Jim do my first draft. Then I'll come in, I'll revise, I'll edit. If Jim can get it done in 2 weeks' time, that gives me approximately 6 weeks to revise the book. So I give Jim my outline, and I explained to him I want it to be like Lee's work, etc. Jim goes to work, and I'm relieved that he's got that, so I can get The Cage and Scratch and Clickers 3 finished. But Jim is ghostwriting for like 6 other people at the time, plus his own stuff. He's late getting me the manuscript. I get his manuscript for Urban Gothic with 4 weeks left for the deadline. And what Jim gave me was not anything I could use. It is not the book you have read. To the best of my knowledge, it's a book that no one has ever read. Jim gave me an actual Gothic, like the old school Gothic novels. It's like Turn of the Screw, set in Philadelphia during the American Revolution and leading up to the American Revolution. And it is nothing like this. And I read it, and I'm like, and I had paid Jim, and I'm like, okay, this is a fine Gothic novel. This is not what I wanted to write at all. It's not anything like I described in my pitch. It's not anything that I can turn into Leisure. So I paid Jim, and I did absolutely nothing with his manuscript. Gave it back to him. Said, I'm sorry, brother, I can't use this, but a deal's a deal. Here's your money. And I don't know what ever happened to that book. I don't know if Jim ever borrowed from it for other works, or if maybe he published it under a pseudonym. I've never seen it. But yeah, then with the clock ticking, I had 4 weeks to write Urban Gothic from scratch, and that's what I did. And the writer's block was completely broke, and I was back into the swing of things again. It's the last time in my career that I ever wrote this fast. I smile now when I think about it, and I have to wonder, and it's only occurring to me now for the first time as we're recording this video. I have to wonder if Jim did that to me on purpose. I love Jim. Jim was one of my best friends. He is very much missed. And that is the kind of thing that Jim used to do. There are memes that writers pass around of Jim Moore glowering at the camera, saying, "Did you write today?" Uh, if you never met Jim, he looked like a biker. He looked like a Hell's Angel. He was probably one of the most gentle, sweet, unassuming men this industry has ever had. But he looked scary. And, Jim was very good about pep talks and firing people up and giving them hard advice when they needed to hear it. And I have to wonder if Jim did that on purpose. I'll never know now. But, But anyway, yeah. So I wrote Urban Gothic from scratch in 4 weeks' time. And that is the story behind it. I know there's been rumors over the year, oh, Brian Keene didn't really write Urban Gothic. He used a ghostwriter. Well, no. Brian Keene wrote Urban Gothic. He tried to use a ghostwriter, but the ghostwriter gave him something that was unusable, so he ended up having to write the novel himself, is the truth of the matter. And it's a good novel. It is extreme horror. And I always tell people who, if they're discovering my work for the first time, this is probably not the one to start with, because it is absolutely extreme horror. With the exception of, the Rising series and I guess maybe Entombed later on, and of course the Complex. I don't get more violent or gory or just over the top than this, which was the idea. That's what I was going for. But I like the novel. I think it's a good job. This is the Leisure Books edition, which those of you of a certain age will remember. This one did well. Once again, we were finally back on the shelves at Walmart. Made it into Target, grocery stores and supermarkets in America across the country had it, as well as, of course, as the indie bookstores and the chain bookstores. This is the Deadite Press version. Always loved this cover by Alan Clark. I know of at least 2 people that have tattoos based on this. One, of course, is my dear friend and longtime reader, Paul. He has this full tattoo. And there's someone else, I don't know the reader's name. I've never met them. I've only seen pictures that got some of this background stuff done as a background in one of their tattoos. There were also a limited edition. And let's take a look at those. Very cool interior, right? The signature sheets threw people for a loop because a lot of people couldn't find the number and the signature on them. But they're there. They're there. And again, it was Bloodletting Press, 300 signed and numbered, 26 lettered. It's for Lee. This is the lettered. Again, man, Bloodletting Press is missed. They made such gorgeous books. Look at these end papers, right? Hard to do with one hand. Anyway, sorry, I'm overcome with emotion. I'm thinking about Jim in the midst of recording this. He passed a couple years ago now. He's missed. And I'm thinking about Ed Lee while I'm recording this. Lee's been pretty public about it online. His health is not good. And he'll be with us for a while longer, but when Lee is gone, it's the end of an era. I always think about Richard Lehman and Jack Ketchum and Edward Lee. The three of them were, and John Peelin. The four of them. They were pals. They were friends. You would see them together at conventions. They stayed in contact with each other. They came up together. And Lee's the last one of that generation, of that group. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get so maudlin with this video. This is the German mass market paperback. Urban Gothic. It was a bestseller. And it's always been one of my better sellers in my backlist. It's one of mine that a lot of fans like. The sequel to it took forever, because what I've found as I get older is it's harder and harder for me to write extreme horror. So we'll talk about that a bit when we get to the sequel, Suburban Gothic, but that is many videos from now. Up next in our history, in our walking tour of Brian Keene's bookshelves, we're going to take a short trip back to Lahorn's Hollow. Then we're going to get locked inside a cage. And we're going to meet Scratch. And that will bring us to Clickers 3. And Clickers 3 is, if back when we were talking about Darkness on the Edge of Town, I said it was the beginning of the end. Clickers 3 is when the end kicks in. Clickers 3, leader of the band and a gathering of crows. That's when everything changes forever. And we are just a few short books away from those. So buckle in, kids. It's about to get really, really bumpy. I appreciate you watching. If you haven't, please go out and buy a book by James A. Moore. Give it a read today. I guarantee you some of your favorite books by some of your favorite other horror authors has Jim's fingerprints on it as well. Or if you haven't, go out and read an Edward Lee book today. Do that as well. These are writers who are not only important to our field and our genre, they're important to me. They're important to many of us. They should not be forgotten. And as always, I appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.